The spring air of 1917 carried the scent of new grass and old memories. Samuel McCrae sat in his rocking chair on the porch of the Hartwell Ranch House, his weathered hands folded across his chest. At 87 years old, his back was still straight, his eyes still sharp, though the decades had turned his hair white as Montana snow. Across from him stood his grandson William, 18 years old and dressed in the brown wool uniform of the American Expeditionary Forces. The boy's face was young, unlined, full of the kind of certainty that comes before a man sees real trouble. In his hand, he held the letter that would send him to France, to trenches and mud and horrors Sam could only imagine. Grace appeared in the doorway, concern etched across her 38-year-old face. She was Sam's daughter, William's mother, and the fear in her eyes was the same fear Sam had seen in Eleanor's eyes 40 years ago when their first child drew breath. "Papa, don't keep him too long," Grace said softly. "We have to leave for the station soon." Sam nodded but didn't move. "Sit down, boy," he said to William. "Before you go to war, you need to understand what a man really is." William remained standing, impatient. "Grandpa, I've heard the stories. About you and Grandma, about how you met." "No." Sam's voice carried the authority of 8 decades. "You've heard the pretty version, the what your mother told at Sunday dinner. Tonight you get the truth." The young man hesitated, then sat on the porch step, his uniform crisp and new. Sam looked past him to the mountains rising in the distance, the same mountains he'd seen that night in January 1878, when everything that led to this moment almost didn't happen. "Your grandmother was dying in the snow," Sam began, his voice steady despite the weight of the memory, "and I almost rode past her." William opened his mouth to speak, but Sam raised one hand. The gesture was small but final. "Listen," the old man said. "Just listen." And Sam McCrae closed his eyes and let himself fall backward through time. The cold came first in the memory. Not the gentle cold of a winter morning, but the vicious killing cold of a Montana blizzard. January 1878. The kind of cold that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground. The kind that made men's lungs burn with every breath. Eleanor Hartwell's fingers had long since stopped feeling like her own. They were foreign things now, distant and useless, clawing at the barn door with a desperation that had moved beyond thought into pure animal instinct. Her nails tore against the wood, leaving dark streaks that froze almost instantly. Blood on frozen wood. The image would stay with her forever, though she didn't know it yet. In that moment, she knew only one thing with absolute certainty. She was going to die tonight on land that was rightfully hers. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees below zero. With the wind screaming across the open prairie at 40 miles per hour, the effective temperature was somewhere close to 45 below. Eleanor's cotton dress, the only thing Beatrice had allowed her to wear that morning, offered about as much protection as tissue paper. She had been outside for 3 hours. 3 hours ago, the plate had slipped. Her mother's china plate, the last piece from the set that had survived the wagon journey from Missouri in 1858. 12 pieces when they started. One piece left after 20 years of frontier life, after her mother's death, after her father's remarriage. Eleanor's hands had been shaking from exhaustion. 14 hours of work that day. Cooking, cleaning, scrubbing floors on her hands and knees, mending Beatrice's dresses, washing bed sheets in water so cold it made her fingers ache. The plate had simply slipped. Beatrice's face had gone white first, then red, then settled into something worse than anger, a terrible cold calm. "You did that on purpose," Beatrice had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was an accident." Eleanor's own voice had been shaking. "I swear it was an accident. Please, I'm sorry." "You've always resented me." Beatrice stood from her chair by the fireplace Eleanor wasn't allowed to sit near. "Always tried to hurt me, to make my life difficult." "No, I would never. Please, there's a blizzard coming. The sheriff warned everyone in town." Beatrice had smiled then, actually smiled. "Then I suppose you should have been more careful with my things." Eleanor had begged. She had pleaded. She had even dropped to her knees on the kitchen floor, something she'd sworn she would never do. But Beatrice had grabbed her by the hair, a handful of brown curls wrapped in those small, strong fingers, and dragged her across the floor. Eleanor's scalp had burned. Her knees had scraped against the rough wood. And then the front door had opened, and the wind had hit her like a fist, and Beatrice had thrown her out into the gathering storm. The door had slammed. The lock had clicked. That was 3 hours ago. Now Eleanor pressed her back against the barn wall, though she couldn't feel the wood anymore. She couldn't feel much of anything. Her teeth had stopped chattering 20 minutes earlier, and some distant, detached part of her mind recognized this as a very bad sign. The medical books her father had kept said that hypothermia came in stages. First you shivered, then you stopped shivering, then you died. She had tried every door. The front door locked, the back door locked, the root cellar locked. Even the barn usually left open for the animals had been locked from the inside. Through the window, she could see her father's old Winchester 1873 rifle leaning against the wall. Beatrice was in there, waiting, watching, making sure. Eleanor looked toward town. Silver Creek was 2 miles away through open prairie. 2 miles that might as well have been 200. The snow was already 18 inches deep and rising. The wind turned every snowflake into a tiny blade. She would make it maybe a quarter mile before the cold took her. She closed her eyes. The cold didn't hurt anymore. That was nice. Maybe dying wouldn't be so bad. She was drifting somewhere warm and far away when she heard it. Hoofbeats, steady and strong, cutting through the howl of the wind like a knife through cloth. Eleanor forced her eyes open. She must be hallucinating. No one would be out in this weather, no one with any sense anyway. But the sound grew louder, closer, and then she saw him, a dark shape on horseback emerging from the white curtain of snow, like something from a dream. Man and horse moving together, the animal's breath creating clouds of steam that the wind tore away instantly. "Hello." The voice was deep, cautious, distinctly male. "Is someone there?" Eleanor tried to call out, but her voice wouldn't work. Her throat had frozen shut. She tried to raise her hand, but her arm wouldn't move. The muscles simply refused the command. All she could do was watch as the rider drew closer, close enough that she could make out details now. A man bundled in a heavy wool coat, a broad-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind, an Appaloosa gelding, the white and brown patches stark against the snow. He was going to ride right past her. No, no, she couldn't let that happen. Eleanor summoned every last scrap of strength in her frozen body and pushed herself away from the barn wall. She made it 2 steps. Her legs, numb and useless, gave out. She fell forward, sprawling face first into the snowdrift. The impact jarred something loose in her throat, forced air through her frozen vocal cords. "Help!" The word came out as barely more than a croak, broken and desperate. "Please help me." The hoof beats stopped. Good Lord. The man's voice was closer now, sharp with alarm. Heavy boots crunched through the snow. Hands touched her shoulders, strong hands turning her over, brushing snow from her face. Eleanor looked up into a pair of brown eyes set in a weathered face she didn't recognize. The eyes were wide with concern, taking in her frozen state with what looked like professional assessment. This was a man who had seen bad situations before. "I can hear you," Eleanor managed. Each word was an effort. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" The man's voice carried an edge of controlled panic. "There's a blizzard coming down." Eleanor felt something that might have been a laugh escape her lips, though it sounded more like a sob. "Already here," she said. "Blizzard's already here." The man's jaw tightened. He looked from Eleanor to the farmhouse with its glowing windows, warm light spilling out onto the snow. Then back to Eleanor. Something changed in his face. The concern hardened into something else. Something that looked almost like anger, though not at her. "That your house," he asked, "was my father's. Someone in there, someone who can help you." Eleanor shook her head, and the movement made the world spin. "She's the reason I'm out here." The man went completely still, dangerously still. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "Can you stand, Aiden?" "I don't think so." "All right." He shifted his weight, preparing to lift her. "I'm going to pick you up now. Is that okay with you?" No man had touched Eleanor in years, not since her father died. But she nodded anyway, because what choice did she have? What choice had she ever had? He lifted her like she weighed nothing. At 110 pounds, malnourished and frozen, she probably didn't weigh much at all. He cradled her against his chest, and the warmth radiating through his wool coat was so intense it was almost painful. Eleanor couldn't help pressing closer, seeking heat like a dying ember seeks oxygen. "I'm taking you to the house," the man said, "getting you inside where it's warm." "She won't let me in." Eleanor's voice was fading. She locked the doors. The man's arms tightened around her. "We'll see about that." He carried her toward the farmhouse, his boots crunching through the deepening snow. Eleanor wanted to warn him, wanted to tell him that Beatrice wouldn't listen, that Beatrice never listened. But she was so tired and he was so warm, and the darkness at the edges of her vision was starting to look welcoming. The pounding on the door seemed to come from very far away. "Open up!" The man's shout cut through the wind. "I've got a woman out here who's half frozen to death." A long pause, then the door creaked open just wide enough for a face to appear. Beatrice's face composed and cold even in the lamplight. Her eyes took in the scene with what might have been genuine surprise quickly masked. "What is the meaning of this?" Beatrice's voice was sharp, imperious. "Found this woman collapsed in your yard, ma'am." The man's tone was respectful but firm. "She needs to get warm right now or she's going to lose fingers, maybe worse." "That woman," Beatrice said, and her voice could have frozen the air between them, "is my stepdaughter, and she is not welcome in this house tonight." Eleanor felt the man go still, completely dangerously still. The kind of stillness that comes before violence or before iron control. He chose control. "Excuse me. You heard me." Beatrice's eyes cold and hard as river stones fixed on Eleanor. "She knows what she did. She can come back when she's ready to apologize." "Ma'am." The man's voice had dropped an octave, gone quiet in a way that was somehow more threatening than if he'd shouted. "With all due respect, there's a blizzard out here. She could die. Then perhaps she should have thought of that before she destroyed my property." The silence that followed was terrible. Eleanor could feel the tension radiating from the man holding her, could feel the effort it took him to keep his voice level. "You'd let your own stepdaughter freeze to death over property. What happens to Eleanor is no longer my concern." Beatrice started to close the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, you're letting the cold in." "Wait." The man's voice had changed, harder now, colder than the wind. "If you won't take her in, I will." Beatrice's laugh was like breaking glass. "How generous of you. I'm sure the whole town will be very interested to hear how Eleanor spent the night with a strange man. What little reputation she has left will be destroyed." "That's her choice to make," the man said. "Not yours." "Is it?" Beatrice's smile was a razor edge. "She's still under my guardianship according to her father's will. Perhaps I should call the sheriff." "Have you arrested for kidnapping?" The man took a step back, adjusting Eleanor's weight in his arms. She was fading fast now, the conversation washing over her like water. But she heard his next words clearly. "You do what you have to do, ma'am. But I'm not leaving this woman out here to die. Not for you, not for the sheriff, not for anyone." He turned and walked away before Beatrice could respond. Eleanor heard the doors slam behind them, felt the final severance of whatever thread had connected her to that house. But she didn't look back. She couldn't. All her remaining strength was focused on staying conscious, on clinging to the warmth of this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. "What's your name?" The question came from somewhere far away. "Eleanor." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Eleanor Hartwell." "I know. Heard your stepmother say it." He lifted her onto his horse, then swung up behind her, wrapping his coat around them both. "My place is about 5 miles from here. It's going to be a cold ride, but I'll get you there. You just hold on, Eleanor Hartwell. You hear me?" "I hear you. Don't you dare fall asleep." "I won't." But she was so tired, and he was so warm, and the rhythm of the horse's movement was almost soothing, despite the wind and the snow and the cold that gnawed at her bones. "Eleanor," his voice was sharp, "talk to me. Keep talking. About what? Anything. Tell me about yourself. Tell me why that woman hates you so much." Eleanor let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "She doesn't hate me. She hates what I represent." "And what's that? Everything she'll never have." Eleanor's eyes were closing despite her best efforts. "The land, the money, my father's love." The man was quiet for a moment. "He left it all to you, you know, in his original will. But she got him to change it before he died. Said she needed to protect me. Protect his legacy." "Well, that don't sound like protection to me." "It wasn't. It was control." Eleanor's voice was fading. "She's been controlling everything since he died 5 years ago. The money, the property, who I can talk to, where I can go. I'm 24 years old and I've never been to town without her permission." The man was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer. That's going to change. You don't know her. She's got everyone fooled. The whole town thinks she's a saint for taking care of her poor dead husband's difficult daughter. I don't care what the town thinks. The conviction in his voice was absolute. I care about what I saw tonight. And what I saw was a woman willing to let another woman die over a broken plate. Eleanor turned her head, trying to see his face in the darkness. How do you know about the plate? I don't, but I know it was something small. Something that didn't matter. Because that's how people like her work. They wait for an excuse, any excuse to do what they've always wanted to do. The truth of his words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Beatrice had been waiting for this, maybe for years, waiting for Eleanor to make a mistake big enough to justify what she really wanted. She wants me dead, Eleanor said quietly. I think she's always wanted me dead. The man's arms tightened around her. She's not going to get what she wants. They rode in silence after that. The only sounds were the whistle of the wind and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. Eleanor drifted in and out of awareness, always pulled back by the man's voice or the shift of his body behind her. Finally, after what felt like hours, she heard him say something that sounded like salvation. We're here. Eleanor forced her eyes open. Through the swirling snow, she could make out the shape of a house. Small but solid, built low against the wind. A light burned in one window, warm and welcoming. The man dismounted and lifted her down, carrying her toward the door. Before they reached it, the door swung open. An older black man with grizzled hair stood in the doorway, holding a lantern high. Boss, his voice was rough with concern. What in tarnation, later Henry? The man carrying Eleanor moved past him into the warmth. Right now I need blankets, hot water, and whatever's left of that stew from dinner. Henry's eyes widened as he took in Eleanor's condition, but he didn't waste time with questions. He stepped aside and disappeared toward the back of the house, already moving with purpose. The man carried Eleanor to a chair by the fireplace and sat her down gently. The heat from the flames was almost painful against her frozen skin, but she leaned toward it anyway, desperate for warmth. We need to get you out of those wet clothes, the man said. Then he immediately looked away, color rising in his weathered cheeks. I'll get you something dry to wear. You can change while I step out. Despite everything, Eleanor felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. You just saved my life. I don't think modesty is my biggest concern right now. Maybe not. The man met her eyes briefly before looking away again. But it's mine. He disappeared into another room and returned with a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers, both obviously his. They'll be too big, but they're dry and warm. I'll be right outside the door. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Eleanor looked down at her frozen fingers. They were waxy and white in places, with red patches that suggested frostbite. She tried to work the buttons on her dress, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. They were too numb, too clumsy. She struggled with the buttons for what felt like an eternity, frustration building, tears threatening. You need help in there. The man's voice came through the door, carefully neutral. Eleanor made a decision. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Mr. McCrae, Samuel McCrae, most folks call me Sam. Mr. McCrae, I need help with my buttons. Just the buttons. I can manage the rest. A long pause. Then quietly, you sure? I'm sure. The door opened just wide enough for him to slip through. He kept his eyes carefully on her face as he worked the buttons loose with steady fingers. Eleanor watched his hands, noting the calluses, the small scars, the evidence of a lifetime of hard work. These were hands that had built things, fixed things, saved things. There, he said when he finished. I'll give you a minute. He was gone before she could thank him. Eleanor managed to struggle out of her wet dress and into Sam's dry clothes. The flannel shirt hung past her knees and she had to roll the trouser legs up several times, but he was right. They were warm. When she called out that she was decent, Sam returned with a bowl of steaming stew and a cup of something that smelled like whiskey and honey. Eat, he said, placing the bowl in her hands, and drink this after. It'll help warm you from the inside. Eleanor ate. The stew was simple, just beef and vegetables in a rich broth, but it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Each bite seemed to push back the cold that had settled into her bones. Sam sat across from her, watching without speaking. Behind him, Henry moved quietly around the room, adding wood to the fire and setting out more blankets. You're staring, Eleanor said finally. Sam blinked. Sorry, just making sure you're all right. I think I will be. She set down the empty bowl and reached for the cup. Thanks to you. The whiskey and honey mixture burned going down, but it spread warmth through her chest. Eleanor felt color returning to her cheeks, feeling coming back to her fingers in painful pins and needles. Why did you help me? She asked. You don't know me. You had no reason to stop. Sam was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I had every reason to stop. You were dying. Most people would have ridden past, especially in a blizzard. Then most people are wrong. He looked up at her then, and his eyes held something Eleanor couldn't quite name. Not pity, not even sympathy, something closer to recognition. That's not an answer. He was quiet again, watching the flames dance. My mother died when I was 19. Fever took her, and there wasn't a thing anyone could do. But I remember sitting by her bed wishing someone would come, wishing someone could help. He paused. Someone did help in the end. The doctor rode out in a snowstorm because my sister sent word. He couldn't save my mother, but he tried. That's what I remember. He tried. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. So she said the only thing that seemed right. I'm sorry about your mother. It was a long time ago. Sam's voice was distant. Point is, I know what it's like to be in trouble and have no one come. I wasn't going to let that happen to you. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, but inside it was warm. Safe. Safer than Eleanor had felt in 5 years. What happens now? She asked. Now you rest. Sam stood. In the morning, it will figure out what to do about your stepmother. There's nothing to do. She controls everything. The land, the money, even me legally. Until I'm 25 or married, I'm under her guardianship. That's what my father's will says. Sam's eyes narrowed. You've seen this will. No, Beatrice keeps all the documents locked away. But she's told me what it says. Many times. And you believe her. The question hit Eleanor like cold water. Did she believe Beatrice? She'd never had a reason not to. Beatrice might be cruel, but she'd never outright lied. At least Eleanor had never caught her in a lie. But tonight, Beatrice had tried to kill her. What was one more lie to a woman like that? I don't know what to believe anymore, Eleanor admitted. Well, Sam said, rising to his feet, we've got time to figure it out. Storm like this, nobody's going anywhere for a few days at least. That gives us time to think, time to plan. He met her eyes directly. Us. You saved yourself, Eleanor. You survived 3 hours in a blizzard when most people would have given up in one. All I did was give you a ride. But if you want my help, you've got it. Whatever you need. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. Something that had been frozen for years, maybe longer than just tonight. Why to? She asked again. You still haven't really told me why, Mom. Sam was silent for a moment. Then he shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Reckon I don't much like bullies. Never have. And your stepmother strikes me as the worst kind of bully. The kind that smiles while she twists the knife. She does smile, Eleanor said quietly. She was smiling when she threw me out. Then I'd say it's past time someone stopped her. He moved toward the back of the house. If you're willing to try, so am I. He left her, then disappearing into the back room to give her privacy. Henry brought more blankets and showed her to a small bedroom that was clearly Sam's own. Boss will sleep in the main room, Henry said, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. You need anything in the night, you holler. I'm in the cabin out back, but I'll hear you. Thank you, Mr. Henry. Just Henry. He paused at the door. And don't thank me yet. Storm's still howling, and we don't know what that stepmother of yours is going to do come morning. But whatever happens, you're safe here. Boss wouldn't have it any other way. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Eleanor stood in the middle of the small room, wrapped in borrowed clothes and borrowed blankets, listening to the storm rage outside. 5 hours ago, she had been certain she was going to die. Now she was alive, warm. And for the first time in years, she had something she'd almost forgotten the feeling of. Hope. It was fragile, tentative, like a candle flame in a drafty room. But it was there. Eleanor climbed into the narrow bed and pulled the blankets up to her chin. The sheets smelled like pine and wood smoke and something else, something that might have been safety. Tomorrow she would have to face reality. Beatrice wouldn't simply let her go. There would be consequences, confrontations, battles to fight. But tonight she was alive, and she wasn't alone. For the first time in 5 years, Eleanor Hartwell fell asleep without fear. Eleanor woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and for a moment she forgot where she was. The narrow bed beneath her was softer than anything she'd slept on in years. The blankets were warm without being suffocating. Sunlight streamed through a small window, painting everything in shades of gold. Then the memories came flooding back. The blizzard, the cold, Beatrice's smile as she closed the door, the stranger on horseback who had stopped when he should have ridden past. Eleanor sat up slowly, testing her body. Her fingers ached. Her toes throbbed with returning circulation. But everything still worked. She was alive. Voices drifted from the main room. Sam's low rumble and another voice she didn't recognize. A woman's voice, warm and practical, the kind of voice that had seen trouble and learned how to fix it. Eleanor found her borrowed clothes from the night before and dressed quickly. When she opened the bedroom door, 3 faces turned toward her. Sam stood by the stove, coffee pot in hand. Henry sat at the table working on a plate of eggs. And a round-faced woman with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes was setting out dishes. "Well, there she is," the woman said, her voice carrying the warmth of a summer afternoon. "I'm Martha Brennan, live about 4 miles down the road. Sam sent Henry to fetch me at first light." She crossed the room and took Eleanor's hands, examining her fingers with practiced efficiency. The touch was gentle but thorough, the kind of examination that spoke of experience. "How do you feel, dear?" "Sore," Eleanor admitted, "but alive. That's what matters." Martha squeezed her hands gently. "Come sit. You need to eat." Eleanor let herself be guided to the table where a plate of food appeared in front of her. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she took the first bite. Real food, enough of it, no one watching to make sure she didn't take too much. "Mrs. Brennan has been helping around my place for a few years now," Sam said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Figured you might want another woman around. Make things more proper." Eleanor looked up at him. "You're worried about my reputation." "I'm worried about giving your stepmother ammunition." The mention of Beatrice made Eleanor's appetite falter. She set down her fork. "She's going to come for me, isn't she?" "Probably." Sam's voice was matter-of-fact. "Question is what she'll try. She'll say I ran off, that I'm unstable, that I need to be brought home for my own good." Martha snorted a sound of pure disgust. "That woman's been saying things about you for years, dear. Half the town believes her, but not all of us are fools." Eleanor stared at her. "You know Beatrice? Everyone knows Beatrice. She makes sure of it. Always at church, always volunteering, always talking about how hard it is to raise her poor dead husband's troubled daughter." Martha's kind face hardened. "But some of us have eyes. We've seen the bruises you try to hide, seen how thin you've gotten, seen how you flinch when she touches you." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Why didn't anyone say anything? The question came out sharper than she intended, edged with years of loneliness and despair. Martha's eyes filled with something that might have been shame. "Because we didn't have proof. Because she's clever. Because it's not our place to interfere in family matters." She reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand. "We were wrong. I was wrong. I'm sorry." Eleanor didn't know what to do with an apology. She'd stopped expecting kindness so long ago that she'd forgotten what it felt like. "It's not your fault," she said finally. "Beatrice is very good at hiding what she is." "Not anymore," Sam's voice was hard. "After last night, everyone's going to know exactly what kind of woman she is." "No," Eleanor shook her head. "They won't. Because she'll spin it. She'll say I ran off into the storm on my own, that she tried to stop me, that she's been up all night worried sick." "And you think people will believe that?" "I think people believe what's easy. And it's easier to believe that I'm the problem than to admit they've been fooled for 5 years." Silence fell over the room. Eleanor could see the frustration on Sam's face, the resignation on Martha's. They knew she was right. "Then we need proof," Sam said finally. "Something she can't explain away." "Like what?" "Like the will. You said she keeps all the legal documents locked up. What if the will she's been showing people isn't the real one?" Eleanor's heart stuttered. "You think she forged it?" "I think a woman who'd leave her stepdaughter to freeze to death wouldn't think twice about changing a few words on a piece of paper." The idea was so big, so terrifying, that Eleanor couldn't quite wrap her mind around it. If Beatrice had forged the will, then everything Eleanor had believed for the past 5 years was a lie. The guardianship, the control, all of it. But if Beatrice had forged the will, then Eleanor's father might have left her everything after all. How would we prove it? She asked. Your father's lawyer. Is he still in town? Eleanor felt hope deflate. Mr. Henderson died 2 years ago, pneumonia. Sam cursed under his breath. Anyone else who might have seen the original, Eleanor thought hard. Her father had been a private man careful with his affairs. He wouldn't have shown the will to just anyone. But there was one person he trusted above all others. Doc Miller, she said suddenly. Dr. Elijah Miller. He was my father's closest friend. They served together in the war. If Papa showed the will to anyone, it would have been him. Then we need to talk to Doc Miller. We can't, not while the storm is still blowing. As if to emphasize her point, the wind howled against the walls, rattling the windows in their frames. Storm should break by tomorrow, Henry said, speaking for the first time since Eleanor had entered the room. Maybe the day after. Ground will be too deep for wagons, but a man on horseback could make it to town. Then we wait, Sam said. And while we wait, we plan. The hours passed slowly. Eleanor helped Martha with the housework, grateful for something to occupy her hands and her mind. Sam and Henry came and went, checking on the animals, clearing paths through the snow that kept piling up. By afternoon, Eleanor felt strong enough to explore the small house. It was modest but well-built with sturdy walls and a roof that didn't leak despite the howling wind outside. The furniture was simple and practical. There were no decorations, no feminine touches. Built it myself, Sam said, catching her looking around. Took me 3 years to get it right. Still needs work, but it keeps the weather out. It's good, Eleanor said honestly. Solid, like something my father would have built. Sam's expression softened. You miss him. Every day. He was the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered. Eleanor ran her fingers along the rough wooden mantel. After he died, Beatrice made sure I knew I was nothing without him. Just a burden, a mouth to feed, a problem to be managed. She was wrong. Was she? Eleanor turned to face him. I'm 24 years old and I've never done anything with my life, never been anywhere, never accomplished anything. All I've done is survive. Sam moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Surviving isn't nothing, Eleanor. Surviving is the hardest thing there is, especially when someone's trying to make sure you don't. Eleanor looked up at him. His brown eyes were steady, certain. There was no pity in his gaze, only respect. Why do you care what happens to me? I told you last night, I don't like bullies. That's not enough. You don't risk your reputation, your standing in the community for a stranger, just because you don't like bullies. Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed and sat down in the chair by the fire, gesturing for Eleanor to take the one across from him. 5 years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Sarah. We met in Denver. She was beautiful, charming, everything a man could want. I thought I was the luckiest man alive. Eleanor sat, sensing that this story didn't have a happy ending. Turns out Sarah wasn't interested in me. She was interested in what she thought I had. Money, property, a future. When she found out my ranch was just getting started, that I was still building, she left. Found a banker who could give her what she wanted right away. I'm sorry, Eleanor said. Don't be. She did me a favor. Showed me what she really was before I made the mistake of marrying her. Sam stared into the fire. But it taught me something. It taught me to recognize people who use others. People who pretend to care but only want what they can take. Your stepmother reminds me of Sarah. Same coldness underneath the charm. Same willingness to hurt people to get what she wants. So, helping me is what revenge? No. Sam's eyes met hers. It's making things right. Sarah hurt me, but she didn't break me. I had the freedom to walk away, to start over, to build something new. You don't have that freedom. Someone took it from you. He leaned forward. I want to help you get it back. Eleanor didn't know what to say. No one had ever offered to fight for her before. Not since her father died. What if we fail? She asked quietly. What if Beatrice wins? Then at least you'll know you tried, and you won't be alone when you do. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside something had shifted. A connection had formed, fragile but real. Eleanor found herself believing that maybe, just maybe, she could actually win this fight. The storm broke on the second day just as Henry had predicted. By mid-morning, the wind had died down enough that Sam decided to risk the ride into town. "I'll talk to Doc Miller," he said, pulling on his heavy coat. "See what he knows about your father's will." "I should go with you." "Not yet. If Beatrice is stirring up trouble, it's better if you're not seen it until we know what we're dealing with." Eleanor wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Beatrice would be expecting her to run to town. Better to stay hidden, stay safe until they had a plan. "Be careful," she said instead. "So am I." Sam tipped his hat and headed out the door. Eleanor watched from the window as he mounted his horse and rode away. The snow was deep, but the Appaloosa was strong. Within minutes, he had disappeared over the rise. "He's a good man," Martha said from behind her. "Best I've known since my Henry passed." "I've noticed." "Have you also noticed the way he looks at you?" Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. "He's just being kind." Kindness doesn't make a man ride through a blizzard. Kindness doesn't make him give up his bed for a stranger. What Sam's doing goes beyond kind, dear. We've known each other for 2 days. Sometimes 2 days is all it takes to know. Martha patted her arm. "I'm not saying you need to rush into anything. Lord knows you've got enough to deal with. But don't close yourself off to possibilities just because you're scared." Eleanor didn't have an answer for that, so she turned back to the window and watched the empty horizon waiting for Sam to return. He came back 3 hours later, his face grim. Eleanor met him at the door. "What happened?" "Beatrice has been busy." He stamped snow from his boots and came inside, moving straight to the fire. "She went to Sheriff Dalton first thing yesterday morning. Told him you ran off in the storm after a disagreement. Said she's worried sick about you." Eleanor felt her heart sink. "And the sheriff believed her." He's skeptical. Said it didn't sit right with him, a woman running out into a blizzard over a disagreement. But without proof of anything else, he can't do anything." "What about Doc Miller?" Sam's expression changed. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or determination. "Doc Miller remembers your father's will. He was a witness when it was signed." Eleanor grabbed Sam's arm. "And what did it say?" "According to Doc Miller, your father left everything to you. No conditions, no guardianship, just a straight inheritance to his only child." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She actually staggered, and Sam caught her elbow to steady her. "That's not what Beatrice told me. She said Papa left her as my guardian until I turned 25 or married." "She lied, Eleanor. She's been lying for 5 years." Eleanor sank into the nearest chair. Her legs couldn't support her anymore. 5 years. 5 years of abuse of control, of being told she was nothing without Beatrice's protection. And all of it based on a lie. "We need to see the actual document," she said, her voice shaking. "We need proof. Doc Miller is willing to testify to what he witnessed. But you're right, we need the physical will. And that means getting it from Beatrice. She keeps it in Papa's old study. The room is locked. It's always locked. Then we'll have to get her to open it." "How?" Sam sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking about that the whole ride back. There's really only one way to force her hand." "What?" "We confront her publicly, in front of witnesses, make her produce the will to prove her claims." Eleanor's mind raced. It was risky. So risky. If Beatrice managed to talk her way out of it, if the town sided with her, Eleanor would be worse off than before. But if it worked? "When?" she asked. "Sunday church service. The whole town will be there. Beatrice won't miss it. She never does." "That's 4 days away." "I know, but we need time to prepare. And you need time to recover." He reached out and took her hand. "Can you do this, Eleanor? Can you stand up in front of everyone and accuse her?" Eleanor thought about the past 5 years. The hunger, the cold, the constant criticism, the bruises she'd hidden under long sleeves, the night in the snow when she'd almost died. She thought about her father, who had loved her, who had wanted to protect her, whose final wishes had been twisted and betrayed by a woman who cared nothing for anyone but herself. "I can do it," she said. "I have to." The days passed quickly. Doc Miller came to visit on Wednesday, bringing his bag and his quiet competence. He examined Eleanor thoroughly, pronounced her recovery remarkable, and stayed for dinner. to discuss strategy. Beatrice won't go down without a fight, he warned them. She's got too much to lose. The land, the money, her standing in the community. She'll say anything, do anything to protect herself. We know, Eleanor said. That's why we need you there, as a witness to what my father actually wanted. I'll be there, wouldn't miss it. Doc Miller's weathered face softened. Your father was a good man, Eleanor. Best friend I ever had. He'd be proud of what you're doing. He'd be horrified that I let it go on this long. No. Doc Miller shook his head firmly. He'd understand. Beatrice is clever. She knows how to make people doubt themselves. But you survived. You kept going, and now you're fighting back. That's exactly what Thomas would have wanted. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back. There would be time for crying later. Right now, she needed to be strong. On Thursday, doubt crept in like fog. Henry returned from a supplies run with news that Beatrice was spreading stories. Eleanor had episodes of madness. She'd destroyed a family heirloom in a fit of rage. She'd run into the blizzard before Beatrice could stop her. The sheriff's position remained the same, concerned but waiting to hear Eleanor's side. What if they believe her? Eleanor asked Sam that evening. What if I'm making everything worse? Sam didn't offer empty reassurance. He treated her fear with the respect it deserved. They might believe her. You might lose, but you'll have told the truth. You'll have fought back. He looked at her directly. Can you live with yourself if you don't try? Eleanor couldn't answer, but she knew the answer was no. On Friday, Martha brought a dress for Eleanor to wear on Sunday. It had belonged to her daughter, kept carefully preserved from the early 70s. Deep green wool, respectable, well-made. It fit Eleanor almost perfectly. You're shedding Beatrice's control, Martha said as she helped with the buttons. Wearing borrowed dignity until you can claim your own. That evening, Eleanor asked Sam about his military service. He told her about the Corps of Engineers, about building bridges and roads during Reconstruction, about being stationed in Texas and Mississippi and Louisiana, about the discharge as a sergeant in 1870, the mustering out pay he'd saved for 5 years to buy his land. Why did you leave? Eleanor asked. I was tired of building things just to watch them get torn down. Reconstruction politics, violence, corruption. Sam stared into the fire. I wanted to build something permanent, something that mattered. The ranch. The ranch, self-sufficient, independent, a legacy for children. He paused. Theoretical children at the time. Eleanor felt something warm bloom in her chest. Are you over her, Sarah? Sam was honest. Mostly. Still makes me cautious. Cautious how? Cautious about trusting women who might want me for what I have instead of who I am. He looked at Eleanor, then really looked at her. But you don't have anything, so I know you're real. The words should have stung. Instead, they felt like the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. On Saturday night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in Sam's bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario in her mind. What if Beatrice denied everything? What if the town sided with her anyway? What if this whole plan fell apart? A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Eleanor, you awake? She sat up. Come in. Sam opened the door, silhouetted by the firelight from the main room. Saw your lamp go out hours ago, but I could hear you moving around. Figured you might want some company. I can't stop thinking about tomorrow. I know the feeling. He moved into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Want to talk about it? Not really. I've already talked it to death with you and Martha and Doc Miller. I know what I need to do. She trailed off, unable to find the words. You're scared. Terrified. I'd be worried if you weren't scared. Sam's voice was quiet. What you're about to do takes courage. Real courage. The kind that doesn't come from not being afraid, but from being afraid and doing it anyway. What if I fail? Then you fail and we figure out what to do next. But at least you'll know you tried. At least you'll know you didn't let her win without a fight. Eleanor looked at him. This man who had appeared out of a blizzard and turned her world upside down, who had offered her shelter and protection in something she hadn't dared to hope for in years. A future. Sam, she said softly. Yeah. Why are you really doing this? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because when I saw you in that snow, I saw someone worth saving. Not just worth saving, worth fighting for. He met her eyes. I know we've only known each other a few days. I know this is all happening too fast. But I've spent 5 years building this ranch alone, telling myself I didn't need anyone. And then you showed up, and suddenly alone didn't seem like enough anymore. Eleanor's heart was pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying that whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that you have a place here, with me, Ata. Not because you need rescuing, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because I want you here. Because these past few days have been the best I've had in years, and I don't want them to end. He reached out and cupped her face in his rough, calloused hand. Eleanor leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. I'm not asking for anything, Sam continued. I know you've got bigger things to worry about right now, but when this is over, when you've got your land back and your freedom and your life, I want you to think about staying, about building something together. Are you proposing to me, Samuel McCrae? I'm asking you to give me a chance. That's all. Just a chance. Eleanor opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, at the hope and fear written plainly on his face, at the vulnerability he was showing her, this strong, capable man who had every reason to guard his heart. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll give you a chance. Yes, I'll think about staying. Yes to all of it. Sam let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Then he smiled, and it transformed his whole face. All right, then. He leaned forward and kissed her. Gentle questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. When they finally broke apart, Eleanor was breathless. Get some sleep, Sam murmured, resting his forehead against hers. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Stay, just until I fall asleep. I don't want to be alone tonight. He nodded and stretched out beside her on top of the covers, keeping a careful distance between their bodies. But his hand found hers in the darkness, and he held on. Eleanor fell asleep with his warmth beside her and his promise in her heart. Tomorrow she would face Beatrice. Tomorrow she would fight for everything she'd lost. And for the first time in 5 years, she believed she might actually win. Sunday morning arrived cold and clear. The church bell was ringing when Eleanor and Sam rode into Silver Creek. Eleanor's hands were shaking despite her gloves, but she kept her chin up and her back straight. She would not let Beatrice see her fear. Martha had dressed her carefully. The green wool dress brought out the gray in Eleanor's eyes. Her hair was pinned neatly beneath a borrowed bonnet. She looked respectable. She looked strong. She didn't feel either of those things. You ready? Sam asked, pulling his horse alongside hers. No, but I'm going anyway. That's my girl. The words sent warmth through Eleanor's chest that almost pushed back the cold dread in her stomach. She held on to that warmth as they approached the church. People were already filing in dressed in their Sunday best. Heads turned as Eleanor and Sam appeared. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Is that Eleanor Hartwell? Where has she been? Who's that man with her? Eleanor ignored them all. Her eyes were fixed on one person. Beatrice stood at the top of the church steps, greeting the congregation like a queen receiving her subjects. She wore black, as always, still mourning for a husband she had probably hated. When she saw Eleanor, her face went through a series of micro-expressions. White with shock, red with anger, then settled into a careful mask of concern. Eleanor stopped walking, forcing Beatrice to come to her. It was a small power play, but important. Eleanor! Beatrice rushed down the steps, arms outstretched. Thank God, we've been so worried. Where have you been? Eleanor's voice came out clear and strong. Don't touch me. Beatrice's hands dropped. Her eyes darted to the growing crowd around them. Don't you dare touch me. The crowd went silent. This wasn't the reunion scene they'd expected. Eleanor, darling, you're clearly not well. Beatrice's voice was honey-sweet, concerned. Let me take you home. We can sort this out in private. No. Eleanor raised her voice so everyone could hear. We're going to sort this out right here, right now, in front of everyone. Beatrice's mask flickered. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Eleanor stepped forward. 5 days ago, Beatrice Hartwell locked me out of my father's house during a blizzard. She left me to die in the snow because I accidentally broke a plate. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Beatrice's face hardened. That's absurd. You ran off after we had a disagreement. I tried to stop you. You dragged me by my hair across the kitchen floor. You threw me out the door and locked it behind me. You locked the barn so I couldn't shelter with the animals. Eleanor held up her hands. The bandages on her fingers were visible. You wanted me dead. Eleanor, please. Beatrice's voice carried a warning edge. You're hysterical. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Eleanor moved closer, close enough to see the fear starting to crack through Beatrice's composure. I also know that you've been lying about my father's will for 5 years. The crowd went absolutely silent. Beatrice's face went pale. I don't know what fantasies you've been spinning, but your father's will is perfectly clear. I am your guardian until you're 25 or married. Is that what it says? Eleanor turned to address the crowd. Because that's not what the will my father actually signed said. Is it Dr. Miller? The elderly doctor stepped forward from the crowd, his weathered face grim. No, it isn't. Elijah, Beatrice's voice carried a warning. Don't do this. You're misremembering. I'm a doctor, Beatrice. I'm trained to observe and remember details. I remember that will very clearly. Doc Miller's voice was steady. I witnessed Thomas Hartwell's will in October 1873, 2 months before he died. There was no guardianship clause. Thomas left everything to Eleanor. The land, the money, the house, all of it. No conditions. That's a lie. Beatrice snapped her composure, finally cracking. You're a senile old man who doesn't remember what happened last week, let alone 5 years ago. Then produce the will, Eleanor said. Show everyone what it really says. Beatrice looked around, searching for allies for escape. She found neither. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. Mrs. Hartwell, this seems like a serious allegation. I think it might be best if we clear things up. Let me see the will, and we can put this whole matter to rest. Beatrice's eyes were wild now, darting from face to face. This is ridiculous. I am the victim here. My stepdaughter ran off in a blizzard, spent days alone with a strange man. She pointed at Sam. And now she's making wild accusations to cover her own shameful behavior. Sam stepped forward, his voice calm. My name is Samuel McCrae. I own the ranch 5 miles east. I found Eleanor collapsed in the snow, half dead from cold. I saved her life. That's all I did. And we're supposed to take your word for that. Beatrice's voice was shrill now. A man who stands to gain from marrying into the Hartwell property. I don't want your property, Sam said flatly. I've got my own land. What I want is justice for a woman who's been abused and lied to for 5 years. More voices joined in, people who had noticed, people who had wondered, people who had been too afraid or too polite to say anything until now. Show us the will, someone called from the crowd. We have a right to know. Reverend Patterson's widow stood. Beatrice's transparency would put this matter to rest. Beatrice stood frozen, trapped. Refusing would make her look guilty, but showing the forged will risked exposure. Eleanor could see her stepmother's mind, working, calculating, searching for a way out. Then Beatrice straightened her spine. That cold, terrible smile that Eleanor knew so well spread across her face. Fine, she said. Come to the house. I'll show you the will. And then I expect full apologies from everyone here for this humiliating display. She turned and walked toward the road, not looking back to see if anyone was following. Eleanor felt Sam's hand on her arm. She's too calm. She has a plan. I know, but we've come this far. We have to see it through. They followed Beatrice to the Hartwell farmhouse, a crowd of townspeople trailing behind them like a strange parade. Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. Same windows, same door, same place where she'd spent 5 years being told she was worthless. Beatrice unlocked the front door and walked straight to Thomas's study, the room Eleanor had been forbidden to enter since his death. Wait here, Beatrice said, pulling a key from the chain around her neck. I'll bring you your precious will. She disappeared into the study, closing the door behind her. The lock clicked. Eleanor counted her heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 30 seconds, 45, 60. Something's wrong, she whispered. Sam moved toward the study door. Mrs. Hartwell, you need to come out now. No answer. He tried the door, locked from inside. Stand back. Sam drew back his foot and kicked. The lock held. He kicked again, harder. Wood splintered. One more kick, and the door flew open. The study was empty. The window was open, cold air pouring in. Curtains fluttered like pale ghosts. And on the desk, a single piece of paper burned in a brass dish. No! Eleanor rushed forward, but it was too late. The flames had consumed most of the document. Only fragments remained charred and unreadable. She burned it, Eleanor said, staring at the ashes. She burned the will. She's getting away. Sam was at the window. I see her, heading for the barn. Sheriff Dalton pushed past them. Everyone stay here. I'll handle this. But Eleanor was already moving. She couldn't let Beatrice escape. Not now. Not after everything. She ran out of the house and toward the barn, her borrowed dress tangling around her legs. Behind her, she could hear Sam calling her name, but she didn't stop. The barn door was open. Eleanor plunged inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Beatrice was there, saddling a brown mare with frantic movements. When she saw Eleanor, her face twisted with pure hatred. You stupid girl, you've ruined everything. You ruined yourself. Eleanor's voice was steadier than she felt. The moment you decided to forge my father's will, your father was a fool. Beatrice's voice cracked. He never appreciated what I sacrificed to marry him. A man with nothing but dirt and dreams and a daughter who looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. So you decided to take everything from me. I decided to take what I deserved. Beatrice's hands were shaking as she worked the saddle straps. I spent 15 years married to your father, watching him pour everything into this land into you. And what did I get? Nothing, just the promise that someday when he died, it would all go to his precious Eleanor. Her voice dropped, became something darker. I was 10 when my mother died of typhoid in a room with 30 other sick people. The Philadelphia almshouse. Do you know what that is? Eleanor shook her head. A poorhouse, where they put people too poor to matter. I spent 4 years there. 4 years. Beatrice's eyes were wild now. Then 14 years old, working 14-hour shifts in a textile mill for $2 a week. Do you know what that does to a person? The fear every day, wondering if you'll end up like your mother. Dead in a charity ward with no one to remember your name. I'm sorry that happened to you, Eleanor said quietly. I'm sorry for your pain, but it didn't give you the right to take it out on me. You don't understand. Beatrice turned to her. Your father promised me safety, security, and then he left it all to you. I lost my mother too. I know what that grief feels like, but I didn't become you. Beatrice's face crumpled. Then her hand moved to the saddlebag. When it came back, it held a gun. Thomas's old Colt .45 revolver. Single action army, 45 caliber, 6 rounds. The barrel pointed straight at Eleanor's chest. I should have done this years ago, Beatrice said, her voice eerily calm now. Would have saved myself the trouble of pretending. Put the gun down, Mrs. Hartwell. Sheriff Dalton's voice came from behind Eleanor. She didn't dare turn around, didn't dare take her eyes off the weapon. Stay back. Beatrice's hand was shaking badly now. Stay back or I'll shoot her. I swear I will. Eleanor took a step forward. The gun was less than 10 feet away. Don't move. Beatrice's voice was high and panicked. Eleanor took another step. Killing me won't give you what you want. It won't make you happy. It won't make you feel safe. You'll just be a murderer with nothing. Another step. She was close now, close enough to see the tears streaming down Beatrice's cheeks. I just wanted to matter, Beatrice whispered. I just wanted to be safe. I know, Eleanor said, but this isn't the way. For a long, terrible moment, Beatrice stood frozen. The gun wavered, then slowly her arm dropped. The Colt hit the barn floor with a heavy thunk. Sheriff Dalton moved forward, quickly kicking the weapon away. Beatrice Hartwell, you're under arrest for forgery, attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and destruction of evidence. He bound her hands with iron cuffs. Beatrice didn't resist. All the fight had gone out of her. She just stood there, no longer imperious or terrifying, just a broken woman who had let fear turn her into a monster. Eleanor watched as Beatrice was led away. She expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, free. Instead, she felt empty. Sam appeared at her side, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. It's over. She can't hurt you anymore. I know. Eleanor leaned into him, suddenly exhausted. So why don't I feel better? Because you're not like her. You don't take pleasure in other people's pain, even when they deserve it. They walked out of the barn together, hand in hand. The crowd parted to let them through, faces filled with shock and sympathy and something that might have been respect. Eleanor had spent 5 years being invisible, being dismissed, being told she was nothing. Now for the first time she was seen, and she was just getting started. The days after Beatrice's arrest passed in a blur of statements and testimonies, in small-town gossip that spread like wildfire. Sheriff Dalton took Eleanor's statement first, then Sam's, then Doc Miller's. Other townspeople came forward with their own stories. Small cruelties they had witnessed, suspicions they had harbored. A picture emerged of a woman who had fooled an entire community for 5 years. 2 days after the confrontation, Eleanor did something she never thought she would do. She visited Beatrice in jail. Sheriff Dalton was reluctant, but allowed it. The jail was a small stone building behind his office, just 2 cells that rarely held anyone more dangerous than a drunk cowboy sleeping off a Saturday night. Beatrice sat on a narrow cot in the far cell, no longer dressed in her widow's black. She wore a simple gray dress provided by the county. Without her careful grooming and composed mask, she looked smaller, older, just a woman. Eleanor stood outside the cell bars. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Why did you come?" Beatrice finally asked. Her voice was flat empty of the venom that usually laced it. "I need to understand." Eleanor's hands gripped the cold iron bars. "Did you ever love my father?" Beatrice was silent for so long that Eleanor thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "I did, at first. He was kind when no one else was." "Then why?" "Because watching him choose you, always you every single day, it rotted something inside me." Beatrice looked up and her eyes were hollow. "I changed the will 2 weeks after he died. I'd practiced his signature for months. Your father's lawyer was drunk half the time. He never noticed." "You could have had a good life," Eleanor said. "He would have taken care of you." "I didn't want to be taken care of." Beatrice's voice was sharp again, briefly. "I wanted to matter, to own something that couldn't be taken away." She laughed, a broken sound. "Now I own nothing but these 4 walls." Eleanor felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Beatrice had been a frightened child, once abandoned and alone. That fear had never left her. It had grown and twisted until it consumed everything good that might have been. "I'm sorry for what happened to you," Eleanor said. "For your mother, for the poorhouse, for all of it. But you had a choice. You could have chosen differently." Beatrice said nothing. Eleanor turned to leave. "Eleanor." The word stopped her at the door. "Build something good. With your land. With your life. Don't let fear ruin you the way it ruined me." Eleanor nodded once and walked out into the sunlight. 3 days later, Judge Harrison arrived from Helena. He was a stern-faced man of 62, with gray whiskers and absolutely no patience for excuses. The trial, if you could call it that, was held in the Silver Creek Town Hall. Every chair was filled. People stood along the walls. The evidence was overwhelming. Beatrice's confession letter written in her own hand, Doc Miller's testimony about the original will, Martha's testimony about years of suspected abuse, Sam's testimony about finding Eleanor half frozen in the snow. Beatrice's court-appointed lawyer was young and inexperienced. He attempted to paint her as a devoted stepmother, driven to desperation by an ungrateful child. It fell flat against the mountain of evidence. Judge Harrison reviewed everything with methodical care. Then he delivered his ruling. Based on the original will dated October 15, 1873, duly witnessed by Dr. Elijah Miller and Martin Henderson, and the subsequent discovery of a forged document, I hereby restore full ownership of the Hartwell estate to Eleanor Hartwell. All lands, buildings, assets, and holdings, effective immediately. Eleanor felt Sam's hand squeeze hers. The land was hers. The house was hers. Everything her father had built. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, Beatrice Hartwell has confessed to multiple felonies. Forgery, fraud, attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon. She is hereby remanded to Montana Territorial Prison in Helena to await formal trial. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor stood in the cold February air and tried to process what had just happened. Free. She was free. The land was hers. Her life was hers. "How do you feel?" Sam asked. "Scared." Eleanor looked at him. I've spent 5 years being told what to do, where to go, how to think. Now I have to figure it all out myself. You don't have to figure it out alone. Sam took both her hands. I meant what I said. Build something with me. Eleanor looked past him at the Hartwell farmhouse in the distance, the place where she'd been starved and beaten and nearly killed. She could never live there. Too many ghosts, too much pain. But the land itself, that was different. That was her father's legacy. That was hers. I'll stay, she said, but not in that house. I can't. Then we'll build a new one. Or sell the whole thing if that's what you want, whatever you need. Eleanor rose on her toes and kissed him. Right there on the courthouse steps with half the town watching. Let them talk. Let them gossip. She was done caring what people thought. When she pulled back, Sam was grinning. What was that for? For being you, for believing me, for all of it. They were planning the wedding when the letter arrived. 2 weeks had passed. Eleanor and Sam had decided on a simple ceremony in late February. Just close friends. Martha was helping with the dress. Doc Miller would give Eleanor away in her father's stead. Then Sheriff Dalton knocked on Sam's door, his face grave. Eleanor, there's news from Helena. She knew before he said it, could see it in his eyes. Beatrice is dead. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sam moved to Eleanor's side, a solid presence. How? Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Hanged herself in her cell. 4 days ago. Used torn bedsheet. Sheriff Dalton held out an envelope. She left this, addressed to you. Eleanor took the letter with numb fingers. After the sheriff left, she sat by the fire and opened it. Sam stayed close but gave her space to read. The letter was 5 pages written in Beatrice's careful script, a full confession, dates and methods of the forgery, names of people she'd paid to lie if questioned, and buried in the study under a loose floorboard was the original will. She couldn't destroy it, Eleanor read aloud. She kept it as proof of what she'd done. At the end, the tone changed, became something almost human. I'm sorry for everything, for the pain I caused you, for the years I stole. I let my fear turn me into something monstrous, and by the time I realized it, I didn't know how to stop. You have your freedom now. Build something good with it, and maybe someday, forgive me, not for my sake, for yours. Eleanor set the letter down. Her hands were steady now. She wants you to feel guilty, Sam said quietly, to give her power even from the grave. I know. Eleanor stared into the fire. But it won't work. I'm done letting her control how I feel. That night, though, alone in the darkness, Eleanor cried. Not for Beatrice the monster, but for the frightened child in the Philadelphia poorhouse, who never learned that fear didn't have to define her. The next day, Eleanor and Sam went to the Hartwell farmhouse. They searched the study exactly as Beatrice had described. 3rd floorboard from the wall, under the carpet. Sam pried it up with a crowbar. The oilcloth package was there, dusty but intact. Inside was the original will, perfectly preserved. Thomas Hartwell's handwriting, his signature, Doc Miller's witness signature, Martin Henderson's seal, October 15th, 1873. Eleanor read her father's words through tears. I, Thomas Hartwell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my entire estate to my beloved daughter Eleanor, to have and to hold in perpetuity without restriction. Physical proof. Her father had loved her, had trusted her, had wanted her to be free. Sam held her while she cried, and this time the tears were healing. The wedding was set for 3 weeks after Beatrice's death. Some people said it was too soon, that Eleanor should wait out of respect. Martha's response was blunt. Respect for who? The woman who tried to kill her. They have waited long enough. The whole town turned out anyway, not just out of guilt, though that played a part, but because Eleanor's story had captured something. The idea that you could survive the worst and still choose to live, to love, to build. The morning of the wedding, Doc Miller came to Sam's cabin with a small wooden box. Your father gave this to me in 1866, he said to Eleanor, right after your mother died. Said to give it to you on your wedding day. Eleanor opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a gold locket on a delicate chain. She opened it. 2 miniature portraits. Her mother Margaret on the left, young and smiling. Thomas on the right, his face kind and strong. He had it made right after you were born, Doc Miller explained. Said he wanted you to always carry them close to your heart. Eleanor couldn't speak. She put the locket on, felt its weight settle against her chest. Her parents, with her, today and always. The ceremony was held in the small church that had witnessed her confrontation with Beatrice just weeks before. But today was different. Today was hope instead of accusation, future instead of past. Eleanor walked down the aisle alone. No father to give her away. No family except the locket warm against her skin. But she wasn't alone. Martha and Doc Miller and Henry sat in the front pew. And at the altar, Sam waited. When their eyes met, he smiled. You came. Did you think I wouldn't? Thought maybe you'd realize you could do better than a broken-down rancher with more dreams than dollars. Eleanor took his hands. There is no better than you, Samuel McCrae. There never could be. The vows were traditional. Simple words that had been spoken in thousands of churches by thousands of couples. But when Eleanor said them, she meant every syllable. I, Eleanor, take you, Samuel, to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. Sam's hands shook as he slid the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, the only thing he had left from her. I, Samuel, take you, Eleanor, to be my wife. His voice cracked with emotion. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. Reverend Patterson smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Sam pulled Eleanor close and kissed her, gentle, reverent, full of promise. The church erupted in cheers. Eleanor laughed against his lips, giddy with a joy she'd never known she could feel. They turned to face the congregation, hand in hand. Eleanor felt the last remnants of the scared, broken girl she'd been fall away. In her place stood a woman, a wife, a survivor. The celebration afterward was unlike anything Eleanor had experienced. Tables laden with food, music and laughter, and children running between the benches. This was community. This was belonging. Henry stood and raised his glass. I've known Boss Sam for 5 years, never seen him happier than these past weeks. Miss Eleanor, you're good for him. You make him better. To the McCraes. The crowd echoed the toast. Eleanor felt tears threatening but held them back. She'd cried enough. Today was for joy. Martha pulled her aside later. You deserve this happiness. After everything you survived, you deserve every good thing. I'm starting to believe that, Eleanor said. And she was. 6 weeks into marriage, Eleanor woke feeling strange. Off balance somehow. She made it to the basin before her stomach emptied itself. It happened 4 mornings in a row. On the 5th morning, Martha stopped by and took one look at Eleanor's pale face. When was your last monthly, dear? Eleanor counted backward. 8 weeks ago. Then understanding, oh, Martha smiled. Congratulations. You're going to be a mother. The afternoon stretched into eternity as Eleanor waited for Sam to return from checking the cattle. She practiced how to tell him, worried about his reaction. They'd never discussed children. Everything had happened so fast. When he finally came through the door, dusty and tired, Eleanor's carefully planned speech vanished. We need to talk. Sam's face went pale. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm pregnant. Silence. Sam just stared at her. Eleanor's heart sank. Then he crossed the room in 2 strides, swept her up, and spun her around. A baby? We're having a baby. You're happy. Happy, Eleanor. I'm terrified. I have no idea how to be a father. But yes, God, yes, I'm so happy I could burst. He set her down gently and dropped to his knees, pressed his lips to her still flat stomach. Hello in there, I'm your father. And I promise right now I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you feel loved. Making sure you feel safe. Making sure you never doubt for a single second that you were wanted. Eleanor ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion in his voice. This was what Beatrice had tried to steal. This love, this hope, this future, but Beatrice was gone, and Eleanor was still here, still standing, still fighting, and now she was going to be a mother. 9 months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Sam built a cradle from oak wood. Martha sewed tiny clothes. Doc Miller checked on Eleanor weekly, pronounced everything progressing well. The pains started in the middle of the night on November 17th, 2 days before the baby was due. Eleanor woke Sam with a gasp. It's time. He was up instantly, all traces of sleep gone. Military training kicking in. I'll get Henry. He'll ride for Doc Miller and Martha. Henry left at 3 in the morning, his horse's hooves thundering away into the darkness. Sam paced the kitchen while Eleanor tried to breathe through the contractions. Doc Miller arrived at 5. Martha at 5:30. This is women's work, Martha said firmly, shooing Sam toward the door. Go pace somewhere else. Eleanor could hear his footsteps in the kitchen, back and forth, wearing a path in the floorboards. Somehow knowing he was there made it easier. The labor lasted 8 hours. 8 hours of pain, worse than anything Eleanor had ever felt. Worse than the blizzard. Worse than frostbite. Worse than years of abuse. But different. Because this pain had purpose. This pain was bringing life. Push, Doc Miller instructed. Push now. Eleanor pushed. She screamed. She cursed. She squeezed Martha's hands so hard she was sure she'd break bones. And then finally a cry. High and thin and absolutely perfect. It's a girl. Doc Miller's weathered face broke into a smile. A beautiful, healthy girl. The baby was placed on Eleanor's chest, still wet and red and screaming. The most beautiful thing Eleanor had ever seen. Hello, she whispered. Hello, little one. I'm your mother. The door burst open. Sam rushed in, ignoring Martha's protest. He stopped short at the sight of Eleanor holding their daughter. His face went through every emotion at once. Terror, love, awe. He fell to his knees beside the bed. A girl. We have a daughter. His hand trembled as he touched the baby's tiny fingers. She has your eyes, Sam breathed. Eleanor, she's perfect. Grace, Eleanor said. Grace Rose McCrae. Sam tested the name. Grace Rose. It's beautiful. Just like her. Just like her grandmother. They sat together in the quiet of the bedroom, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall, but inside was warmth and safety and the beginning of something new. 1 year later, on Grace's first birthday, Eleanor stood in the kitchen of their home and looked out at the land, the same land her father had built, the same land Beatrice had tried to steal. But now it was alive again. Sam had expanded the barn, started a small herd of cattle. The garden Eleanor had planted was thriving, full of roses, grown from seeds she'd found in her mother's things. Grace toddled across the floor chasing a ball, 10 months old and already walking, already stubborn and strong. What are you thinking about? Sam asked, coming up behind her. That I'm grateful. For all of it. Even the hard parts. Eleanor leaned back against him. Because without them, I might never have become strong enough to claim what I deserve. Sam wrapped his arms around her. You were always strong. You just needed someone to believe it. That evening, as snow began to fall, Eleanor and Sam sat on the porch and watched the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Grace was asleep inside, watched over by Martha. Do you ever think about that night? Eleanor asked. The blizzard? Every day of my life. Sam's voice was quiet. Every day, I'm grateful I didn't ride past. Best decision you ever made. Second best, marrying you was first. Eleanor smiled, then carefully, I've been thinking about the Hartwell land. What about it? I want to build there a new house, new beginning, something our children can inherit. Sam looked at her. Children plural. As many as we're blessed with. He pulled her close. Then we'll fill that house with children and love and everything Beatrice tried to take from you. In that moment, sitting on the porch with her husband beside her and her daughter sleeping inside Eleanor, felt something she'd spent 5 years believing she'd never feel again. Complete. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was barely the beginning. On the porch of the Hartwell Ranch in the spring of 1917, old Sam opened his eyes. The memory faded. The present returned. William was still sitting on the step, his young face serious now, thoughtful. That's why you told me, William said slowly, not just about Grandma surviving, but about what comes after. That's right. Sam's voice was rough with age and emotion. Your grandmother didn't just survive that night in the snow. She built something from it. something that led to you. The door opened. Grace appeared, followed by Eleanor. At 82, Eleanor moved slower than she once had. Her hair was white, her back slightly bent. But her eyes were still the same gray that had looked up at Sam from the snow 40 years ago. You told him the whole story, Grace said to Sam. It wasn't a question. He needed to hear it. Eleanor moved to the porch railing, looking out at the land. 3 houses now stood where there had been one. The original ranch where she and Sam still lived. 2 more built by their children. 4 children total. 18 grandchildren. 3 great-grandchildren so far. William? Eleanor's voice was still strong despite her age. You're going to war. You're going to see terrible things. But you come from people who survived impossible odds. She removed the locket from around her neck. The same locket Doc Miller had given her on her wedding day. Inside, the portraits of her parents were faded but still visible. Take this with you to France. Grandma, I can't. It's too precious. That's exactly why you need it. Eleanor's voice was firm. Precious things remind us what we're fighting for, what we're trying to get back to. She placed it in his hands. William's fingers closed around the gold. You survive, Eleanor said, pulling him into a fierce hug. You come home, and then you live. You build something good, like your grandfather and I did. William nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner. The house was full of noise and laughter and life. 4 children, 18 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren. All of them descended from a woman who had nearly died in the snow and a man who had stopped when he should have ridden past. Later, after everyone had gone, Sam and Eleanor sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, the same spot where Sam had told William the story. Snow was beginning to fall, gentle and soft. 40 years, Eleanor said quietly. 40 years since that night. Feels like yesterday. Feels like forever. Do you ever regret it, stopping for me? Sam reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwined, fitting together the way they had for 4 decades. Not for a single second. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Inside, through the window, they could see their family, their legacy, all of it built from one decision on one frozen night. Some people aren't meant to be broken, Sam said half to himself. Some people are meant to rise, to bloom. He looked at Eleanor, at the woman who had clawed her way back from death, who had stood up to her abuser in front of the whole town, who had built a life and a family and a legacy that would echo through generations. You were one of those people, he said. You always were. Eleanor smiled. We both were. They sat in comfortable silence as the snow fell around them, the same snow that had nearly killed Eleanor 40 years ago, the same mountains that had witnessed her darkest night. But everything else was different now. Inside, their family laughed and talked and lived. Outside, the roses Eleanor had planted from her mother's seeds would bloom again in spring, just as they had every year since she'd first put them in the ground. The locket was on its way to France, carried by a boy who represented the 4th generation of a family that almost didn't exist. And Eleanor McCrae, who had once believed she would die, worthless and alone in a Montana blizzard, sat hand in hand with the man who had saved her life and spent 40 years proving that survival was just the beginning. The snow continued to fall soft and gentle, covering the land in white, but there was no fear in it now. Only peace, only the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived and a legacy secured. Tomorrow William would board a train for war, but tonight he carried with him the knowledge of where he came from, the strength of his grandmother's survival, the love of his grandfather's choice to stop. And that, Sam thought as he rocked slowly in his chair, was worth more than all the gold in Montana. Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. Sam wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They had built something beautiful from ashes and pain and frozen blood on wood. They had turned near death into abundant life. They had proved that some stories don't end in the snow. Some stories are just beginning.